The first thing Zuri felt was the door handle in her palm. Cold, hard, final. The second thing she felt was Zola's heartbeat against her chest, small and fast, like a bird that knew the cage was open but hadn't decided whether to trust it yet. The third thing she felt was nothing. Because feeling things slowed you down, and slowing down was how you got caught. She ran. Not the kind of running that means freedom. The kind that means whatever is behind you is worse than anything ahead. Her shoes hit each concrete step in the stairwell like a countdown. 5, 4, 3, Zola half asleep against her shoulder, tiny fingers locked in the collar of Zuri's jacket with the instinctive grip of a child who had learned, without being taught, that holding on was survival. Amara. The voice came from above. Not a shout. Never a shout. Throne's voice was the kind of calm that made your blood go cold because it meant he had already decided. The rage was already done. This was just the execution. Come back upstairs. You're embarrassing yourself. She hit the exit door with her shoulder and burst onto the street. Busan morning swallowed her whole, the clatter and diesel and rain-soaked pavement, the gray light of a city that did not care and never had. She moved fast, head down, one arm locked around Zola, and then she walked directly into a wall that turned out to be a person. She stumbled. A hand caught her elbow. Not grabbing, catching. Her body knew the difference before her brain did. She looked up. The man was still. That was the first thing she noticed. Not tense, not startled, just still, the way people are still when they are used to chaos and have stopped being afraid of it. He looked at her face. Then at Zola. Then at the bruise along Zuri's jaw that she had been trying to angle away from the light. Are you hurt? He said. I'm fine. The automatic answer. The answer she had given so many times it had worn smooth, like a stone in a river. Behind her, the exit door opened. There you are. Throne stepped out onto the pavement, and the temperature around him seemed to drop 2 degrees. He had put on his jacket. He had straightened his collar. He was already performing normal for the stranger watching. Sorry about her, she gets overwhelmed. Baby, let's go back upstairs. The man with his hand on Zuri's elbow did not move. Throne's eyes shifted to him. Something passed across his face, a recalibration, quick and invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years learning to read it. This is private, he said. Step aside. No, the man said. Just that. One word. No explanation, no posturing, no hand on the chest. Just no, delivered like a full stop at the end of a sentence that Throne had not been allowed to finish. Throne's jaw tightened. You don't know who you're talking to. I know exactly who I'm talking to, the man said. Day 1. And I know what 38% of a holding company looks like when it's about to evaporate. Walk away, Throne. Right now. The silence that followed was the longest 4 seconds of Zuri's life. Throne looked at the man. Then at Zuri. Then back. And something in his face shifted, not fear exactly, but the recognition of a wall he hadn't seen coming. He straightened his jacket again. Smoothed the lapel. And then, without another word, he turned and walked back through the door. Zuri stood on the pavement and could not move. Zola lifted her head from her mother's shoulder, blinking at the gray morning. Is the loud quiet now? She asked. Yes, baby, Zuri whispered. The loud is quiet now. The man, Day 1, looked at her. Not with pity. Not with the particular hunger of someone who thought rescuing a woman entitled him to something. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you intend to solve properly. Come inside, he said. There's someone who can look at that. He meant the bruise. She hadn't thought anyone could see it in the low morning light. She wanted to say no. She had been saying no to strangers for 3 years because strangers were never just strangers. But Zola was shivering against her chest, and her own legs were shaking in a way she couldn't stop, and sometimes the only choice you have is between the danger you know and the danger you don't. She followed him inside. She didn't know, as she sat in a quiet room on the 14th floor with an ice pack against her jaw and Zola pressed warm against her side, that the man who had just walked her off the street owned a significant share of the company she worked for. She didn't know that Throne had been using his own stake in that company to keep her cornered, a financial leash she hadn't even known was around her neck. She didn't know that the pendant at her throat, the crescent-shaped one she had worn every day for 11 years because it was the last thing she had from before, had been made by the hands of the man now standing quietly in the doorway watching his housekeeper press arnica gel to her face. She didn't know any of it yet. What she knew was that Zola had stopped shaking. What she knew was that the room was warm. What she knew was that for the first time in longer than she could remember, there was no sound of footsteps in the hallway that made her chest tighten. Zola looked up at her mother's face with the unfiltered honesty of a 4-year-old and said, "Your face looks different on one side. Like you fell from somewhere very high." Zuri looked at her daughter. Something like that, baby. I'll fix it. Zola pressed the cloth more carefully to her mother's cheek. I'm good at fixing things. From the doorway, Daewon watched and said nothing. But something moved behind his eyes, something old and unfinished, like a sentence interrupted years ago that had just, without warning, found its next word. If this story already has you gripped, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single episode. The plot twists in this one are coming fast. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 8. Zuri kept waiting for the catch. That was the thing about surviving the kind of life she had survived. You stopped believing in kindness that didn't want something back. Every soft thing had a hard edge underneath it. Every open door had a lock on the other side. So she waited. She watched Daewon move through his mornings with the quiet efficiency of a man who had long since made peace with who he was, and she looked for the thing beneath it. The agenda. The angle. The moment the mask would slip and she would see what she already knew was there. It never came. What came instead was Jinho. Jinho arrived on day 4 with no introduction beyond a nod and positioned himself at whatever distance kept Zuri visible without crowding her. He was not a large man, but he had the particular stillness of someone who had made difficult decisions quickly and without regret. He walked her to work. He walked her home. He stood outside the convenience store on the corner of her street with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and no desire to be anywhere else. On the 9th day, Throne found her. Not at the apartment, he didn't know about the apartment yet. At the park, 2 streets from where she used to live, where she had made the mistake of taking Zola on a Tuesday afternoon because Zola had asked 3 times and Zuri had thought, just this once, just an hour, it will be fine. It was not fine. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She always heard his footsteps before she saw him. That had been one of the first things she had trained herself to do, back when training herself meant the difference between a bad night and a night that put her in a hospital. She was pushing Zola on the swing when the sound of him registered in her spine before her ears had fully processed it, and she gripped the chains of the swing and forced herself not to run because running in front of Zola was the one thing she had promised herself she would never do again. Fancy seeing you here, Throne said. He was standing at the edge of the park with his hands in his pockets and his collar up against the wind, and he was smiling the way he smiled when he had already won and was simply waiting for you to figure it out. You look well, Amara. New jacket? We're leaving, Zuri said. To Zola, not to him. Mama, I'm still swinging. Now, baby. Come on. She lifted Zola from the swing and turned. Throne was closer than he had been 30 seconds ago. She hadn't heard him move. That was the other thing, she had never heard him move when he didn't want her to. I just want to talk, he said. Soft. Reasonable. The voice he used in public, in front of witnesses, the one that made people around them think she was the unstable one. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She doesn't want to talk. Jinho stepped out from behind a tree to Zuri's left, and Throne's smile flickered for just a fraction of a second before it reset. He looked at Jinho the way he had looked at Daewon on the street, recalibrating, measuring, deciding. Another one, Throne said. He's collecting you. Walk away, Jinho said. I'm standing in a public park. Walk away. Something in Jinho's tone ended the conversation before Throne could redirect it. He looked at Zuri one more time, and this was the look she knew, the real one, the one that didn't perform anything for anyone, and what it said was, this isn't over. This is never over. You know that. Then he turned and walked out of the park like a man with somewhere better to be. Zola watched him go. Then looked up at Jinho. Is he the bad man? Jinho looked down at her. Yes. I thought so, Zola said. He has a wrong smile. Some smiles are wrong. Mama taught me that. Jinho looked at Zuri over the top of Zola's head. Zuri looked back. And in that look was everything she hadn't said out loud, how close that had felt, how easily it could have gone differently, how thin the line was between safe and not safe even now, even here, even with everything Daewon had put in place. That evening, Jinho told Daewon about the park. Daewon sat at his desk and listened without interrupting. When Jinho finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Daewon opened his laptop, pulled up a shareholder registry, and began to work with the focused silence of a man who had decided something and was now simply executing it. All of it, his legal associate asked over the phone 20 minutes later. Every seat. Every contract. Every authorization with his name attached. I want it done by morning. Sir, his stake in the Onyx Group parent is significant, there will be pushback from the board. Then manage the board. That's what I pay you for. A pause. Understood. And get his work authorization flagged for review. I want documented grounds by end of day. Day-won paused. Then, quieter, he was in a park with her child today. Document that too. He ended the call and sat back. Jin-ho was still in the doorway. You know this will make him dangerous, he said. Men like Throne don't accept being cornered quietly. I know, Day-won said. So you're ready for whatever he does next. It wasn't a question. Day-won looked at the drawing on the corner of his desk, 3 figures in Zola's unsteady hand, a tall man, a woman, a little girl, and something in his expression settled into a kind of quiet certainty. I've been ready, he said, for a long time. Jin-ho looked at the drawing. Then at his employer. And for the first time in 11 years of working for this man, he thought he finally understood what all of it, the patience, the precision, the controlled quiet, had actually been for. He said nothing. But he understood. It was the pendant that broke everything open. Not a confrontation. Not a document. Not a confession dragged out by pressure or circumstance. Just a Tuesday night, a quiet hallway, and the crescent-shaped pendant catching the light at exactly the wrong angle, or the right one, depending on which side of the secret you were standing on. Zuri had been on her way to check on Zola. Day-won had been on his way to the kitchen. They met in the narrow corridor between the living room and the bedroom doors, and in the half-second before either of them stepped aside, the lamp on the hallway table threw its light directly onto the pendant at Zuri's throat. Day-won stopped. Not the polite pause of someone waiting to pass. A full stop. His eyes went to the pendant and stayed there, and the expression that crossed his face was not one Zuri had seen before, not his professional calm, not the quiet authority he wore like a second skin. This was something older. Something that had been filed away for a very long time and had just, without warning, been pulled back out. That necklace, he said. Zuri's hand went to it instinctively. It's old. I know. His voice was barely above a murmur. I made it. The hallway shrank. Zuri stood very still. The kind of still that is not calm but its opposite, the stillness of a person whose every internal system has just fired at once and cancelled each other out. She looked at him. He looked at the pendant. And the silence between them was the loudest thing she had heard in 3 years. 11 years ago, he said. Not to fill the silence. Not to explain himself. Just the fact, placed quietly between them like an object on a table. I made that pendant. There was only one. You're wrong, she said. Her voice came out steady. She had always been good at steady when everything else was falling. It was a gift. From someone I knew a long time ago. From me, Day-won said. And he looked up from the pendant and met her eyes for the first time since they had stopped in the hallway, and what she saw in his face undid her completely because it was not accusation, not suspicion, not the face of a man who wanted to expose her. It was recognition. The particular grief of someone who has been looking for something for a very long time and has just found it in the last place they thought to look. Zuri did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark with Zola curled against her back and she stared at the ceiling and she turned the pendant over and over between her fingers and she thought about the night it had been given to her, a rooftop in the rain, 11 years ago, a boy who had made it himself because he said bought things didn't carry enough of the person who gave them. She had laughed at him for that. She had told him it was the most impractical romantic gesture she had ever heard of. She had put it on and not taken it off for 11 years, through everything, through the attack and the surgeries and the new face and the new name, because taking it off felt like agreeing that the person she had been before was gone. She had not agreed. She had never agreed. But now the man who made it was sleeping 2 doors down the hall and she had been living in his house for 8 months and calling herself by a name that wasn't hers, and every morning she had woken up and made the decision again, not today, not yet, just a little longer, just until it's safe, and now the pendant had made the decision for her. She knew what she had to do. It took her 4 more days. For days of moving through the apartment with the careful normalcy of a woman who was not about to detonate the careful life she had rebuilt. For days of watching Day-won give no indication that he was pushing, no sign that he was waiting her out, no pressure of any kind, just the same quiet presence, the same measured mornings, the same way he looked at Zola like she was something he wanted to protect without being asked. For days of Zola drawing at the kitchen table and humming to herself and being exactly, devastatingly, the reason Zuri had to tell the truth. Because Zola deserved a life built on something real. On the 5th night, after Zola was asleep, Zuri walked into the living room where Day-won was reading and she sat down across from him and she said, I need to tell you something. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He closed his book. He set it down. He gave her his full attention the way he did everything, completely, without reservation. She took a breath. My name isn't Amara, she said. It hasn't been for 3 years. My real name is Zuri. And I think on some level you already know that. He said nothing. He had promised. Someone ordered an attack on me. Paid for it to look like a robbery gone wrong. I was supposed to die, Day-won. I woke up in a clinic in Accra because a nurse disobeyed her instructions and called an ambulance instead of doing what she had been paid to do. I had 3 surgeries over 14 months. They rebuilt my face. I was given a new name and told to disappear. She paused. I disappeared. I came back for Zola. I came back to give her something safe. And I ended up here. In your house. And I have known for 8 months exactly who you are to me, and I said nothing because knowing was dangerous and I was terrified. The room was completely silent. Day One had not moved. I'm not asking you to forgive me for the silence, Zuri said. I'm just asking you to hear it. A long moment passed. Then another. Who ordered it? He said. His voice was very quiet. Zuri looked at him. And the answer she gave him changed everything, because it was not a stranger's name. It was not an enemy's name. It was the name of someone who sat at his dinner table. Someone who had held him as a child. Someone whose photograph was on the wall in the hallway he walked through every single morning. The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. And the ripples it made were going to reach every shore. Day One did not sleep that night either. He sat in his study with the documents spread across his desk, not because he needed to read them again. He had read them 4 times already and each time they said the same thing, but because looking at them kept him anchored to what was real. What was provable. What could not be explained away or softened or reframed as a misunderstanding. He needed that anchor because the alternative was to feel the full weight of what he now knew, and if he felt it all at once it would break something in him that he was not sure he could repair. His mother. He kept returning to that. Not the evidence was clean, thorough, damning beyond any reasonable argument. What he kept returning to was his mother's hands. The same hands that had held his face when he was sick as a child. The same hands that had pressed food into his when he forgot to eat during exam season. The same hands that had, 11 years ago, shaken Zuri's at a dinner table and smiled and said welcome to our family like she meant it. Those hands had signed a payment. Those hands had made a call. Those hands had looked at a young woman with a 4-month-old daughter and decided that her life was an acceptable loss in the accounting of family legacy. He thought about Zola. 4 years old, pressing a cloth to her mother's face, saying I'm good at fixing things. He thought about Zuri, 14 months in a clinic in Accra, learning a new name, learning a new face, learning how to be a person whose survival depended on being unrecognizable. He thought about every morning for the past 8 months, coffee in the kitchen, Zola at the table with her drawings, Zuri moving through the apartment with that particular careful grace of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, and he understood now that what he had read as composure was actually the daily discipline of a woman holding an enormous secret with both hands so it didn't crush her daughter. By 3 in the morning he had made every decision that needed to be made. By 6 he had called his legal team. By 9 he was in his car. His mother's house was 40 minutes outside the city, a property that had been in the family for 2 generations, all dark wood and high ceilings and the particular silence of a house that had always valued appearances above honesty. He had grown up in that silence. He had mistaken it, for most of his life, for dignity. He knew better now. Madame Yun was in the sitting room when he arrived, dressed and composed, a cup of tea at her elbow, the morning paper open on her lap. She looked up when he walked in and her expression did the thing it always did, a slight softening, a warmth that was real and complicated and did not cancel out anything else she was. You didn't call ahead, she said. No, Day One said. I didn't want to give you time to prepare. She looked at his face then. Really looked. And he watched her understand that something had shifted permanently, not cracked, not bent, but broken clean through in a way that could not be mended with the usual tools. She set down her teacup with the precise care of a woman buying herself 3 seconds. He placed the documents on the table between them. She looked at them. She did not touch them. She did not need to, he could see in the stillness of her face that she already knew what they contained. How long have you had these? She said. Long enough, he said. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or did you think it wouldn't matter by the time I did? Madame Yun was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I made a decision to protect this family. You tried to kill a woman, Day One said. She had a 3-month-old daughter. She was a threat. She was 26 years old. His voice did not rise. That was the thing about Day One's anger, it never rose. It descended. It got quieter and quieter until it was barely above a whisper, and that was when it was most dangerous. She was 26 years old and she loved me and you decided that made her expendable. I decided that she was a distraction from everything you were supposed to become. Don't. The word landed like a closed door. Don't make it about my future. Don't make it about legacy or business or the family name. You looked at a human being and you erased her. You erased her face. You erased her name. You took 3 years from her daughter, 3 years of a child growing up in hiding, in fear, in the shadow of what you did, and you are sitting here talking about protection. Madam Yun said nothing. I spent 11 years not understanding why she disappeared, Daewon said. 11 years believing she had simply left. Do you understand what that does to a person? Do you understand what I built and closed off and refused to feel because I thought she had chosen to go? His mother looked at her hands. I needed you to know, he said, that I know. Not for revenge. Not to hurt you. But because the truth is the only thing left between us and I will not pretend otherwise. He straightened. As of today you have no position in any family business. No access. No authority. No vote. The criminal charges have already been filed, my legal team submitted them this morning. Security will be stationed at this house. Not for your protection. Madam Yun's head came up sharply. To make sure you stay, he said. The silence that followed was vast and terrible and final. Madam Yun looked at her son, this man she had raised, this man she had in her own broken way believed she was protecting, and she opened her mouth. Daewon. Don't, he said again. Softer this time. Almost sad. There's nothing left to say that changes any of it. He picked up the documents from the table. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and did not turn around. I hope one day you understand what you took from her, he said. From both of us. I don't think you do yet. He walked out. Behind him, Madam Yun sat in the sitting room of the house she had always controlled, in the silence she had always cultivated, and for the first time in her life she found that the silence had nothing left to offer her. Outside, Daewon sat in his car for a long moment before he started the engine. Then he drove back to the city. Back to the 14th floor. Back to Zuri and Zola and the drawing on the fridge with 3 figures in it, a tall man and a woman and a little girl, drawn by a child who had decided without being asked that he belonged in the picture. He had a lot of ground to make up. He intended to make all of it. Throne had always been a man who operated best in the spaces between certainty and doubt. That was where he lived, in the gray area where nothing could be fully proven, where plausible deniability was a currency he spent carefully and replenished often. He had built his entire professional life in that space. His relationships too. The trick, he had always believed, was to never let anyone get close enough to see the architecture. Keep them confused. Keep them off balance. Keep them just uncertain enough that confronting him felt riskier than tolerating him. It had worked for a long time. It stopped working on a Wednesday morning when he arrived at his office and his access card failed at the entrance. He tried it twice. Then a third time. The light stayed red. He looked up at the security camera above the door with the particular expression of a man who already knows what is happening but needs one more second to decide how to react to it. Then he called his assistant. The call went to voicemail. He called the board liaison. That call was answered on the 3rd ring by a voice he didn't recognize, which told him in polite and carefully chosen words that his access to all company premises had been suspended pending a review of his shareholder agreements and employment contracts, and that a formal letter had been dispatched to his registered address that morning outlining the specific grounds. What grounds? Throne said. A pause. The letter will explain everything, Mr. Throne. I want you to explain it. Now. To me. On this phone. Another pause, longer this time. Conduct violations. Authorization irregularities. And, the voice hesitated, as if reading from a document and uncertain whether to continue, a formal complaint filed with the Labor Authority regarding abuse and harassment. The work permit review has been escalated to the Immigration Board as of this morning. The line was very quiet. Who filed the complaint? Throne said. Not a question. He already knew. The letter. He ended the call. He stood on the pavement outside the building he had walked into every morning for 6 years and he felt, for the first time and longer than he could remember, the cold specific sensation of consequence. Not the manageable consequence of a setback or a negotiation gone sideways. The other kind. The kind that doesn't negotiate. The kind that has already spoken to lawyers and filed paperwork and moved pieces across a board while you were still deciding whether to play. He thought about Daewon on the street that first morning. One word. No explanation. No posturing. Just no. He had underestimated that. He would not make the same mistake twice. He spent 3 days making calls. Quietly. Carefully. Pulling at threads he had spent years weaving into a safety net, favors owed, connections maintained, people who had reasons to want Daewon's influence checked. Slowly, methodically, he began to understand the shape of what had been done to him, and as he understood it his fury sharpened from heat into something colder and more precise. Daewon had not just removed him from the company. He had removed him from everything. Every seat. Every contract. Every professional relationship that Throne had used as leverage had been quietly, surgically severed, and the people on the other end of those relationships were not returning his calls. The immigration review meant his ability to remain in the country was no longer certain. The labor complaint meant his name was attached to a formal record that would follow him regardless of outcome. He had been made invisible. And the only way to become visible again was to go directly to the source. On the fourth day he went to the apartment building. He had found the address the same way he found everything, through a chain of small pressures applied to people who thought their loyalty was to him until it turned out it wasn't. He stood in the lobby of the building and looked at the directory and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel because it was incompatible with control. Desperation. He pressed the button for the 14th floor. Nothing. He pressed it again. Then he walked to the main entrance of the lobby proper and pushed through the inner door, and that was when Jin-ho stepped into his path so smoothly and so completely that it was almost graceful, like a door closing exactly when it should. "Mr. Throne," Jin-ho said. "I need to speak to her." "She doesn't want to speak to you." "That's not her decision." Throne stopped. Because behind Jin-ho, in the lobby, two men in dark jackets were walking toward him with the unhurried certainty of people who have paperwork and don't need to rush. He recognized one of them. He had seen that particular walk before, outside courtrooms, outside boardrooms, in the moments before everything changed. "Marcus Throne," the first man said. Throne looked at Jin-ho. Jin-ho looked back at him with an expression that was not satisfaction and not cruelty but simply the face of a man who had stood between a woman and danger for long enough that seeing the danger finally stopped was sufficient. "There is a warrant," the second man said. "Please come with us." Throne did not move for a moment. He looked past Jin-ho toward the elevator, toward the 14th floor, toward the woman he had spent 3 years hunting through every shadow he could find. He thought about the park. About the stairwell. About every careful, controlled moment he had engineered to keep her afraid. "She did this," he said quietly. "To no one. To himself." "No," Jin-ho said. And his voice, for the first time, had something in it beyond flat calm. Something that had been compressed for a long time and was now allowed exactly one sentence to exist. "You did this. The moment you raised your hand." The lobby doors opened. Throne walked out of them between two people who had not asked for his cooperation because they did not need it, and the automatic doors closed behind him with a sound so ordinary, so unremarkable, so completely indifferent to the weight of the moment, that it almost felt like a joke. Almost. Upstairs on the 14th floor, Zuri's phone buzzed. A single message from Jin-ho. 2 words. "He's gone." She read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed, really breathed, from the bottom of her lungs, the kind of breath you can only take when the thing you have been bracing against for 3 years has finally, actually, stopped coming. Zola wandered in from the living room with a crayon behind her ear and a drawing in her hand and looked at her mother bent over the counter breathing like she had just surfaced from deep water. "Mama," she said, "are you crying?" Zuri looked up. Her eyes were wet. She hadn't noticed. "Happy crying," she said. Zola considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old processing new information. "Is that a real thing?" "Yes, baby," Zuri said. "It's the realest thing there is." Zola nodded, apparently satisfied, and held up her drawing. "I made a new one," she said. "Come and look. I added someone." The drawing had 4 figures in it. Zuri stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Zola had drawn them in her usual style, big round heads, stick bodies, arms that were slightly too long, everyone's feet pointing outward like they were all permanently mid-dance. But there were 4 of them now where there had always been 3, and the 4th was small, smaller than the others, tucked in the bottom corner of the page with a tiny round head and 2 eyes and what appeared to be a very determined expression for someone drawn in orange crayon. "Who is that?" Zuri asked, pointing to the small figure. Zola gave her the look she reserved for questions she considered unnecessary. "The baby," she said. "Obviously." Zuri looked at her daughter. "What baby?" Zola sighed with the exhausted patience of a child who believed the adults around her were significantly slower than advertised. "The one that's coming," she said. And then she took her drawing back, walked to the fridge, and stuck it up with a magnet shaped like a fish, and that was that, as far as Zola was concerned. Zuri stood in the kitchen for a very long time after that. She had not told anyone yet. She had found out 4 days ago, in a pharmacy 2 streets from the apartment, standing in a fluorescent-lit aisle with a test in her hand and her heart doing something complicated and enormous in her chest. She had not told day 1. She had been turning the telling over and over like a stone, examining it from every angle, trying to find the right moment, the right words, the right way to hand someone information that would change the shape of everything. Her 4-year-old had beaten her to it. That evening, after dinner, after Zola had been put to bed with considerable negotiation regarding the number of stories she was owed, Zuri found Day One in the kitchen washing up with the sleeves of his shirt rolled to the elbows, his back to her, unhurried, domestic in a way she had never expected from him and had never quite gotten used to. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. Day One, she said. I know, he said. He didn't turn around. She blinked. You know? Zola showed me the drawing this afternoon. He turned off the tap. Turned around. Looked at her with an expression that was so full of so many things, tenderness and disbelief and a joy he was clearly trying to hold at a responsible volume, that she felt her eyes fill before she could stop them. She explained it to me very thoroughly. She also said she wants the baby to be a girl and has already chosen a name, which apparently is not negotiable. Zuri laughed. It came out wet and helpless. Of course she has. Day One crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her and lifted his hands and held her face gently, carefully, the way you hold something you have been looking for a very long time and cannot quite believe is real. He looked at her, all of her, the face that had been rebuilt, the eyes that were entirely her own, the woman who had survived the unsurvivable and walked back into a life she deserved. I have something for you, he said. He reached into his pocket. Brought out a small box, dark blue, unremarkable on the outside. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of simple white cloth, was a ring, not elaborate, not performative, just a clean band of gold with an engraving on the inside face. She took it from the box and tilted it toward the light and read the single word engraved there. Zuri. Not Amara. Not the name she had worn like borrowed clothes for 3 years. Her name. Her real name, pressed into gold by a man who had known it since the night of the pendant and had waited, 8 months, in the same apartment, through all of it, for her to be ready to wear it again. You knew the whole time, she whispered. I knew, he said. And I would have waited as long as you needed. I would have waited forever if that's what it took. She looked at the ring. Then at him. Then she said, without hesitation, without fear, without the careful measuring of risk that had governed every decision she had made for 3 years, yes. He put the ring on her finger. From the hallway came the sound of small bare feet on the floor, and then Zola appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with her hair loose and her eyes wide, and she looked at the ring on her mother's finger and then at Day One and then back at the ring with the expression of someone whose plan has come together exactly as intended. Finally, she said. They were married 3 weeks later in a room so small it barely qualified as a venue, just the 4 of them, because the 4th was already there, already counted, already drawn in orange crayon on the fridge. Jinho stood at the back with his arms folded and his jaw set in the particular way of a man who has moved and has decided no one will be informed of this. Zola wore yellow, as negotiated, and held both their hands during the vows and swung between them because she was 4 years old and joy, to a 4-year-old, is not a still thing. The vows were short. That was Zuri's choice. She had spent 3 years hiding inside long explanations, long silences, long distances between herself and the truth. She was done with long. She looked at Day One and she said, I spent 3 years learning how to disappear. I don't want to disappear anymore. I want to be here. With you. Completely. Day One looked at her and said, you were never gone. Not to me. I just had to wait for you to come back. Zola, from somewhere around their elbows, said, is it the kissing part yet? And the room broke open with laughter, real and unguarded and alive, the kind of laughter that only happens when the worst is genuinely behind you. It was the kissing part. 6 months later, the apartment on the 14th floor had been rearranged to accommodate a new reality. A crib in the corner of the bedroom. A second set of drawings on the fridge. Zola had updated her artwork to reflect current events with impressive editorial speed. Evenings that smelled like dinner and sounded like argument about whose turn it was to settle the baby and ended the same way every night, quietly, warmly, with Zola asleep on the sofa and Zuri and Day One on either side of her like parentheses around the most important sentence either of them had ever lived. Zuri still wore the pendant. She wore it differently now, not tucked inside her collar, hidden, a secret pressed against her skin. She wore it outside. Visible. A crescent catching the light on an ordinary Tuesday, on the 14th floor of a building in Busan, in a life that had been taken from her and taken from her and taken from her until she had decided, once and for all, that it could not be taken again. She had been right. Zola came home from nursery one afternoon with a painting she had made, messier than usual, more ambitious, a full landscape of figures and color and one very lopsided sun in the top right corner. She spread it on the kitchen table and pointed at each figure in turn, narrating with the authority of a child who considers herself the family historian. That's Mama, she said. That's Day One. That's me. That's the baby. And that, she pointed to a small figure at the edge of the painting, separate from the others but facing toward them, that's the lady who didn't win. Zuri looked at the small figure at the edge. Then at her daughter. Why did you put her in? She asked. Zola shrugged with the easy wisdom of someone who has not yet learned to make things complicated. Because she's part of the story, she said. But she's not part of the family. Zuri looked at the painting for a long time. Then she put it on the fridge next to all the others, right in the center, and stepped back and looked at the whole collection. Every version of their family that Zola had documented in crayon and paint and felt tip pen, from 3 figures to 4, from fear to safety, from hiding to here. Here. That was the word. After everything, the attack, the clinic, the surgeries, the new face and the borrowed name and the 3 years of looking over her shoulder, the word that mattered was the simplest one. She was here. Zola was here. They were all here. And no one was coming to take that away. If this story moved you, share this episode with someone who needs a story that reminds them that survival is not the end, it is just the beginning. Like this video, share it, and we will see you in the next one. Because the next story? It starts even harder than this one did. Thank you for staying until the end. It means everything.